and I'm going to clean up the room. We should be starting in a few minutes. In the meantime, we'll listen to some audiobooks, and then the meditation will begin.
Expression of his diseased ego, so he created a demented, ugly creature, pathologically strong and huge. Dear Greg, the breakdown of establishment conditioning usually occurs first at the university level. Students refuse to accept the lie that our exploitation of the world's peoples is actually beneficial to them. They begin to refuse their share of the spoils. Huey Newton and Bobby Seale left the campus to form the Black Panther Party. The Students for a Democratic Society gave birth to the Weathermen. The rise of socio-political institutions to their present form and complexity was not the result of chance. The corporation, the university, the unions, the mass media, the foundations, the associations, the courts, the prisons, the army, police, national and international, uniformed and disguised, from their beginnings were formulated as enforcers of state centralism. An examination focused on the history of all the major socio-political institutions of the United States, a study in the genetics of hierarchy, would certainly uncover the totally economic motive underlying the foundations of these institutions. For my purpose, I would broadly divide the major socio-political institutions into two classes. One designed by the state to move people into certain actions, and the other to discourage, curtail, or completely deny certain other actions. The unintelligible vastness of these institutions makes it seem impossible that they could be owned and operated by a relatively small number of men, but the truth of this can be demonstrated by documented evidence and irrefutable case studies. The modern, industrial, corporative, city-based state could never function at all without hierarchical control and an acceptance by the people of the controlling hierarchy. Prior conditioning, of course. The effects of ubiquitous self-negation inbred since childhood, of course, again. Certainly, the pervasive nihilism of capitalist man, but these are simply effects. Western civilization is dying because it's tied into an economic system that was decadent 100 years ago. This system was certainly the calculated creation of a specific minority class. The rise of the manufacturing class was not spontaneous. It is perpetuated beyond the stage of decadence in spite of fits of outrageous disorder. Its seemingly remarkable ability to return from crisis is not proof of natural durability. Rather, it is proof of a destructive will to power at any cost. Frankenstein's need for a servant was an expression of his diseased ego, so he created a huge, pathologically strong, demented, ugly creature. He censored the beast's activity by making him underintelligent. He erected institutions flexible enough to keep the giant working, but rigid enough to forestall any growth of his mental faculties. A brain was grudgingly attached to the beast to provide a way for it to act. The beast worked and fought the enemies of his creator. The beast was content to watch the creator flourish. He lived through his creator. And when he finally saw himself as he was, he went mad. The corporation, the foundation, the association, the mass media, the state-controlled unions, the universities, and primary schools are all designed to move people into very specifically pre-ordered and monitored actions. The actual monitoring is done by a broader segment of the stratified slave state, but the pre-ordering is done by the 1/10 of 1%, the ruling class and governing elite of the corporative arrangement. The careful observer can see immediately how the guiding instructions are held together by red tape and rubber bands so that they can be very flexible when necessary. The corporation's flea market and the mass media are relatively new techniques of control, as are the institutional foundations in most of the associations. The foundations, whether family or corporate, are tax-exempt financial mechanisms ostensibly established for altruistic influences in the fields of art and culture generally. They subsidize scientific research, higher education, educational TV, etc. The Rockefellers alone control 13 such foundations, through which they also control the oil holdings of 90 to 100 nations in the third world countries mainly, holdings variously estimated in value from 10 to 14 billion dollars. Similar foundations are controlled by the Fords, Kellogg's, and Carnegies, etc., etc. When the international business interests of these family financial institutions are threatened, the tax-supported international police are activated. After the CIA fails, the special forces are called upon. When necessary, the Marine Corps and infantry intervene. Comrade George. Blood in My Eye by George L. Jackson. American justice. For their freedom to prey on the world's people, whatever the cost in blood. Dear Greg, in order for capitalism to continue to rule, any action that threatens the right of a few individuals to own and control public property must be prohibited and curtailed, whatever the cost in resources. The international wing of the repressive institutions has spent $1.5 trillion since World War II. Whatever the cost in blood, My Lai, Augusta, Georgia, Kent State, the Panther trials, the frame-up of Angela Davis, the national repressive institutions, police, National Guard, Army, etc., are no less determined. The mayors that curse the rioters and the looters, Mayor Daley of Chicago has ordered them summarily executed in the streets, ignore the fact that their bosses have looted the world. I refuse to make any argument with statistics compiled by the institutions and associations that I indict. Yet it is true that even official figures prove the case against capitalism. The Federal Bureau of Investigation compiles and indexes almost all information on crime in the United States. I have the figures as it states them right here. Vital Statistics, FBI Crime Report, Property Crimes, 87% of the total in 1969, 28% of these crimes occurring in the ghetto. Since 1960, the number of men and women prisoners in state and federal penitentiaries has fluctuated slightly around the 250,000 mark. These statistics conceal the living reality. This is my 11th year of being shoveled into every major prison in the most populous state in the nation, and the largest prison system in the world. What I have seen in these 11 years is the living situation. The experience is quite different from the columns of figures neatly arranged to give the impression of well-studied, detached, scientific, and calculated analysis. Hidden are the facts that at each institution I've been in, 30 to sometimes 40% of those held are black, and every one of the many thousands I've encountered was from the working or lumpen proletariat class. There may be a few exceptions, but I simply have not met any of them in my 11 years. Where I am confined now in San Quentin Prison, California, awaiting trial for 2 alleged crimes, conviction on either of which would subject my lungs to the poison gas treatment, there are 17 cells in what is euphemistically called the Adjustment Center, but is far more accurately known as the Hole. The AC is San Quentin's triple maximum security, and all of these cells are filled, 11 of them with black men, every one of them without exception from the working class. I I've been arrested, interrogated, or investigated more times than I care to count. I've learned 10 times more about the process than the most expert single groups of inquisitors. From the first moment I'm brought into this scenario, I attempt to establish control over the exchanges that will take place between myself and my captors. Depending on the situation, one learns to feign either indignation, surprise, idiocy, or fear. At times, the peasant philosopher face will work. I don't think I am an exception at all, as most blacks learn by age 15 how to handle the cretins who hire out as guns for the privileged. There is only one type of inquisitional situation that I personally cannot control, the sessions that begin with violence. In those cases, guile fails and blacks learn to fight multiple opponents while handcuffed, or at least learn how to protect the groin area. I simply have never managed to develop a technique against 9 armed men who are fascinated with damaging my private parts, but I'm still learning. All black people, wherever they are, whatever their crimes, even crimes against other blacks, are political prisoners because the system has dealt with them differently than with whites. Whitey gets the benefit of every law, every loophole, and the benefit of being judged by his peers. Other white people, blacks, don't get the benefit of any such jury trial by peers. Such a trial is almost a cinch to result in the conviction of a black person, and it's a conscious political decision that blacks don't have those benefits. Howard Moore Jr., attorney official of the court, but not for the court, he's in a position to know. He's honest, black, and dedicated enough to tell. The purpose of the chief repressive institutions within the totalitarian capitalist state is clearly to discourage and prohibit certain activity, and the prohibitions are aimed at very distinctly defined sectors of the class and race-sensitized society. The ultimate expression of law is not order, it's prison. There are hundreds upon hundreds of prisons and thousands upon thousands of laws, yet there is no social order, no social peace. Anglo-Saxon bourgeois law is tied firmly into economics. One can even pick that out of those vital statistics. Bourgeois law protects property relations and not social relationships. The cultural traits of capitalist society that also tend to check activity, individualism, artificial politeness juxtaposed to an aloof rudeness, the rush to learn how to instead of what is, are secondary really, and intended for those mild cases and groups that require preventative measures only. The law and everything that interlocks with it was constructed for poor, desperate people like me. Jonathan, my younger brother, understood this point perfectly. The purport of the raid of the Marin County Courthouse was more significant by far than its calculable effects. I knew him well, since he was and still is my alter ego. He went to liberate and to educate with aggressive and free action. He knew that as he proceeded in liberating there would be more action. He wasn't a speechmaker, and neither am I. Escape from the myth, the hoax, by moving people into action against the terror of the state, counterterrorism, is the real significance of the August 7th affair. To Jonathan, the striking exposure was audacity, audacity, and more audacity. Theory and practice, strategy and tactics were based in his mind on actual confrontation within this particular historical development. He must have calculated that Foucault Army activity that was hidden and nameless, operating where the objective conditions for revolution already existed and had existed for a dozen decades, would survive and grow if, at the same time, the Black Panther political apparatus continued to develop its autonomous infrastructure. Proof of his theory was built right into the action. 5 desperate men were offered arms as a means to freedom. 3 took them. Proof of the role of law within the totalitarian-authoritarian relationship was also built into the action. In a fit of reckless, mindless gunfire, 100 automated goons shot through the bodies of a judge, district attorney, and 3 female non-combatants to re-establish control over all activity. To prevent certain actions, no cost in blood is too high. It would seem that so much free fire would be difficult to explain, but it is not. Freedoms are invariably being protected with this gunfire. Freedom must then be interpreted 1,000 separate ways, but it actually comes down to freedom for a few families and their friends. Freedom to prey upon the world. Acceptance of enslavement is deeply buried in the pathogenic character types of capitalism. It is a result of the sense of dread and anxiety, which is the lot of all men under capitalist rule. Compulsive behavior and disordered obsessional longings are actually made synonymous with character in our disordered society. But to emphasize these conditions before examining the institutions from which they spring is to confuse effect with cause and further cloud the point of attack. So far, cultural analysis has established that the psychosis is so ingrained, the institutions so centralized, that what is needed is total revolution. The armed struggle between the have-nots with their vanguard and the haves with their hirelings or macabre freaks that live through them. Civil war between at least these two sections of the population is the only purgative. Total revolution must be aimed at the purposeful and absolute destruction of the state and all present institutions, the destruction carried out by the so-called psychopath, the outsider, whose only remedy is destruction of the system. This organized mass of violence directed at the source of thought control is the only realistic therapy. Analysis of the oppressed mentality and the psychopathic personality that accrue from contact with the prevarications of American culture must be carefully integrated with the analysis of the source. Simple interpretation of effects tends to calcify. It certainly promotes defeatism. Action makes the front. One can quietly refuse to accept the constrictions of bourgeois culture, can reject himself, hate the self, and turn inward. By so doing, he accomplishes a form of individual revolt. But here again we find another unconscious manifestation of the thing we hate, individualism, a now attitudinal instrumentality of bourgeois culture. We cannot escape. One simply cannot reject constrictions without rejecting and putting to death the constrictor. An armed attacker cannot be ignored. Gandhi and the gurus were all abject fools. I would certainly be dead if, when critical flashpoints matured, I hadn't backed my rejection with blows. I would hate to have been a Vietnamese in my lie without arms. I hate encounters like the one at my last court appearance on April 6, 1971, when the enemies who attacked me had all the weapons. I would hate to run into freaks who have Mike Hammer/J. Edgar Hoover complexes without being armed. My pledge is to arms. My enemies are institutions and any men with vested interests in them, even if that interest is only a wage. If revolution means civil war, I accept, and the sooner begun, the sooner done. I don't think the enemy can be identified any more carefully than this. Further identification must be made in the process. I feel elated that my brother died with 2 guns in hand. I'm going to miss him and all the others, though death in our situation is only a release. I miss people intensely. I miss him intensely. But he and the others who sought freedom died at the throat of the principal repressive institution of the empire. They died making real attempts at freedom. I paraphrase Castro on trial after Moncada. I warn you, gentlemen, I have only begun. Blood in My Eye by George L. Jackson. Toward the United Front. A new Unitarian and progressive current has sprung up in the movement centering on political prisoners. How can this Unitarian conduct be developed further in the face of determined resistance from the establishment? How can it be used to isolate reactionary elements? Unitary conduct implies a search for those elements in our present situation which can become the basis for joint action. It involves a conscious reaching for the relevant, the entente, and especially, in our case, the reconcilable. Throughout the centralizing authoritarian process of American history, the ruling classes have found it necessary to discourage and punish any genuine opposition to hierarchy. But there have always been individuals and groups who rejected the ideal of two unequal societies existing one on top of the other. The men who placed themselves above the rest of society through guile, fortuitous outcome of circumstance, and sheer brutality have developed two principal institutions to deal with any and all serious disobedience: the prison and institutionalized racism. There are more prisons of all categories in the United States than in all other countries of the world combined. At all times, there are 2/3 of a million people or more confined to these prisons. Hundreds are destined to be legally executed, thousands more quasi-legally. Other thousands will never again have any freedom of movement, barring a revolutionary change in all the institutions that combine to make up the order of things. 1/3 of a million people may not seem like a great number compared with the total population of 200 million. However, compared with the 1 million who are responsible for all the affairs of men within the extended state, it constitutes a striking contrast. What I want to explore now are a few of the subtle elements that I have observed to be standing in the path of a much-needed united front, non-sectarian, to effectively reverse this legitimized ripoff. Prisons were not institutionalized on such a massive scale by the people. Most people realize that crime is simply the result of a grossly disproportionate distribution of wealth and privilege, a reflection of the present state of property relations. There are no wealthy men on death row, and so few in the general prison population that we can discount them altogether. Imprisonment is an aspect of class struggle from the outset. It is the creation of a closed society which attempts to isolate those individuals who disregard the structures of a hypocritical establishment, as well as those who attempt to challenge it on a mass basis. Throughout its history, the United States has used its prisons to suppress any organized efforts to challenge its legitimacy. From its attempts to break up the early Working Men's Benevolent Association to the banning of the Communist Party during what I regard as the fascist takeover of this country, to the attempts to destroy the Black Panther Party. The hypocrisy of American fascism forces it to conceal its attack on political offenders by the legal fiction of conspiracy laws and highly sophisticated frame-ups. The masses must be taught to understand the true function of prisons. Why do they exist in such numbers? What is the real underlying economic motive of crime and the official definition of types of offenders or victims? The people must learn that when one offends the totalitarian state, it is patently not an offense against the people of that state, but an assault upon the privilege of the privileged few. Could anything be more ridiculous than the language of blatantly political indictments? The people of the state versus Angela Davis and Rachel McGee, or the people of the state versus Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins. What people? Clearly the hierarchy, the armed minority. We must educate the people in the real causes of economic crimes. They must be made to realize that even crimes of passion are the psychosocial effects of an economic order that was decadent 100 years ago. All crime can be traced to objective socio-economic conditions, socially productive or counterproductive activity. In all cases, it is determined by the economic system, the method of economic organization. The people of the state versus John Doe is as tenuous as the clearly political frame-ups. It's like stating the people versus the people, man against himself. Official definitions of crime are simply attempts by the establishment to suppress the forces of progress. Prisoners must be reached and made to understand that they are victims of social injustice. This is my task working from within. While I'm here, my persuasion is that the war goes on no matter where one may find himself on bourgeois-dominated soil. The sheer numbers of the prisoner class and the terms of their existence make them a mighty reservoir of revolutionary potential. Working alone and from within a steel-enclosed society, there is very little that people like myself can do to awake the restrained potential revolutionary outside the walls. That is part of the task of the prison movement. The prison movement, the August 7th movement, and all similar efforts educate the people in the illegitimacy of establishment power and hint at the ultimate goal of revolutionary consciousness at every level of struggle. The goal is always the same: the creation of an infrastructure capable of fielding a people's army. Each of us should understand that revolution is aggressive. The manipulators of the system cannot or will not meet our legitimate demands. Eventually, this will move us all into a violent encounter with the system. These are the terminal years of capitalism, and as we move into more and more basic challenges to its rule, history clearly forewarns us that when the prestige of power fails, a violent episode precedes its transformation. We can attempt to limit the scope and range of violence in revolution by mobilizing as many partisans as possible at every level of socio-economic life. But given the hold that the ruling class has on this country and its history of violence, nothing could be more certain than civil disorders, perhaps even civil war. I don't dread either. There are no good aspects of monopoly capital, so no reservations need be recognized in its destruction. Monopoly capital is the enemy. It crushes the life force of all of the people. It must be completely destroyed as quickly as possible, utterly, totally, ruthlessly, relentlessly destroyed. With this as a common major goal, it would seem that anti-establishment forces would find little difficulty in developing common initiatives and methods consistent with goals of mass society. Regretfully, this has not been the case. Only the prison movement has shown any promise of cutting across the ideological, racial, and cultural barricades that have blocked the natural coalition of left-wing forces at all times in the past. So this movement must be used to provide an example for the partisans engaged at other levels of struggle. The issues involved in the dialectic which flows from an understanding of the clear objective existence of overt oppression could be the springboard for our entry into the tide of increasing worldwide socialist consciousness. In order to create a united left whose aim is the defense of political prisoners and prisoners in general, we must renounce the idea that all participants must be of one mind and should work at the problem from a single party line, or with a single party line, or with a single method. The reverse of this is actually desirable. From all according to ability. Each partisan outside the vanguard elements should work at radicalizing in the area of their natural environment, the places where they pursue their normal lives when not attending the rallies and demonstrations. The vanguard elements, organized party workers of all ideological persuasions, should go among the people, concentrated at the rallying point with consciousness-raising strategy, promoting commitment and providing concrete, clearly defined activity. The vanguard elements must search out people who can and will contribute to the building of the commune, the infrastructure, with pen and clipboard in hand. For those who aren't ready to take that step, a packet of pamphlets should be provided for their education. All of this, of course, means that we are moving, and on a mass level, not all in our separate directions, but firmly under the disciplined and principled leadership of the vanguard Black Panther Communist Party. One simply cannot act without a head. Democratic centralism is the only way to deal effectively with the American ordeal. The Central Committee of the People's Vanguard Party must make its presence felt throughout the various levels of the overall movement. With the example of unity in the prison movement, we can begin to break the old behavioral patterns that have repeatedly allowed bourgeois capitalism, its imperialism and fascism to triumph over the last several decades. We tap a massive potential reservoir of partisans for cadre work. We make it possible to begin to address one of the most complex psychosocial byproducts that economic man with his private enterprise has manufactured: racism. I've saved this most critical barrier to our needs of unity for last. Racism is a matter of ingrained traditional attitudes conditioned through institutions. For some, it is as natural a reflex as breathing. The psychosocial effects of segregated environments, compounded by bitter class repression, have served in the past to render the progressive movement almost totally impotent. The major obstacle to a united left in this country is white racism. There are three categories of white racists: the overt, self-satisfied racist who doesn't attempt to hide his antipathy; the self-interdicting racist who harbors and nurtures racism in spite of his best efforts; and the unconscious racist who has no awareness of his racist preconceptions. I deny the existence of black racism outright. By fiat, I deny it. Too much black blood has flowed between the chasm that separates the races. It's fundamentally unfair to expect the black man to differentiate at a glance between the various kinds of white racists. What the apologists term black racism is either a healthy defense reflex on the part of the sincere black partisan who is attempting to deal with the realistic problems of survival and elevation, or the racism of the government stooge organs. As black partisans, we must recognize and allow for the existence of all three types of racists. We must understand their presence as an effect of the system. It is the system that must be crushed, for it continues to manufacture new and deeper contradictions of both class and race. Once it is destroyed, we may be able to address the problems of racism at an even more basic level. But we must also combat racism while we are in the process of destroying the system. The self-interdicting racist, no matter what his acquired conviction or ideology, will seldom be able to contribute with his actions in any really concrete way. His role in revolution, barring a change of basic character, will be minimal throughout. Whether the basic character of a man can be changed at all is still a question. But we have, in the immediacy of the issues in question, the perfect opportunity to test the validity of materialist philosophy again. Because we don't have to guess, we have the means of proof. The need for Unitarian conduct goes much deeper than the liberation of Angela, Bobby, Erica, McGee, Los Siete, Tijerina, white draft resistors, and now the indomitable and faithful James Carr. We have fundamental strategy to be proved, tested, and proved. The activity surrounding the protection and liberation of people who fight for us is an important aspect of the struggle, but it is important only if it provides new initiatives that redirect and advance the revolution under new progressive methods. There must be a collective redirection of the old guard, the factory and union agitator, with the campus activists who can counter the ill effects of fascism at its training site, and with the lumpen proletariat intellectuals who possess revolutionary scientific socialist attitudes to deal with the masses of street people already living outside the system. They must work toward developing the unity of the pamphlet and the silenced pistol. Black, brown, and white are all victims together. At the end of this massive collective struggle, we will uncover our new man, the unpredictable culmination of the revolutionary process. He will be better equipped to wage the real struggle, the permanent struggle after the revolution, the one for new relationships between men.
Now we'll begin the meditation and the rest of the routine.
This is a guided meditation on peace, presentness, and political revolution. Find a place where you can sit comfortably, perhaps resting your hands on your knees. You may wish to sit on the floor with your legs crossed. Or, if you're not too tired, you may like to lie down on your back. Whatever position suits you. Make sure that your chest is open, and you may wish to allow your eyes to gently close, or find a point in the room where you can rest your focus. Begin by noticing your breathing. Feel your chest rising and falling, your belly expanding in and out. You don't have to change the way you breathe, just becoming aware of it. In and out. Notice also that society can be thought of as being made up of groups of people with conflicting and irreconcilable economic interests, which we call classes. You don't have to change society in this moment. This is your moment, your time. Just notice class conflict and be aware of it. This will be our anchor as we proceed on this journey. And now, let's take 3 deep, relaxing breaths. As you release the air in your lungs, you may wish to repeat in your mind the topics of today's meditation. And with each breath, I invite you to experience a doubling of your relaxation. Let's take the first of these 3 breaths now. Breathing in, peace, and out. Very good. Breathing normally in between, becoming even more relaxed with each breath. Let's take the second breath now. In, presentness, and release. Fantastic job. Aware of your chest, rising and falling. Let's take the third and final breath now. Breathing in, political revolution, and out. Well done. Don't worry if your breathing doesn't match the sound of my voice. It is all good, and it is all okay. Just becoming even more aware of breath, and beginning slowly to to relax. As we breathed those 3 relaxing breaths, you may have noticed a slight tingling sensation spreading from the top of your head down through your shoulders, arms, chest, right out the tips of your toes. This sensation is available to you throughout this meditation, whenever you desire. Don't be distressed or upset if you become distracted by thoughts or sounds in the room. Just keep coming back to breath. The world can be chaotic, and we can lose focus when we think about what we might like to change, or something we wish we could control. But just invite yourself to come back to breath and the model of class conflict. Breathing in and out. As you sink deeper and deeper into this relaxed state of awareness, you may begin to notice the position of your body, the surfaces you are in contact with, the temperature of the room. And you may also notice your body's position in the system of global capitalism. And the air continues to flow, becoming even more relaxed, even more aware. Now, in this relaxed state, we are ready to consider the revolution. As you breathe in and out, receive an invitation to the idea that revolution will look different for you if you are in a bourgeois nation enriched by global capitalism than it might for someone in a country impoverished by it. Returning always to breath and class conflict. When we think about revolution, we may imagine it as destructive or violent. We may conjure images of past revolutions that we think fell short, or make jokes about sending landlords and capitalists to violent ends. We may shy away from this image, whether because we are liberals rather than socialists, or because we were raised in liberal capitalist societies that maintain a hold on our thoughts, or perhaps out of compassion and love for our fellow human beings, whoever they may be. Whatever the reason, we may desire to avoid revolution, but simply agitate for reform within capitalist society while maintaining its comforts. But although revolution means a break with the old ways of doing things, it need not be fundamentally destructive, but instead an act of creation. It may be scary or painful, like bringing a new child into the world, but it is the birthing of a new way of life, rather than the gradual managing of decay and bargaining with entropy that liberal democracy has become. This is not to say that we cannot learn from our mistakes or come to an understanding of history. Simply that, in considering the revolution, we want our focus to be on the present, and not our anxieties about the past. Do not judge yourself if you have doubts. Simply observe them and let them go. We may become anxious or depressed when we ruminate on the past and witness the destruction and pain that can seem to surround us. We can be upset by the wickedness of others and wonder how it is that human beings can have done so many awful things to each other or the planet. Conversely, we may rejoice at small changes that we have managed to win in the past through elections and trade unions in the struggle for a fairer world. But the past is not real and exists only in our memories, in the present, where breath and class conflict remain, and where we want our focus to be. Breathing in, peace, and out. Each breath deepening your relaxation and your awareness. When we are not dwelling on the past, we often project our thoughts about revolution into the future, as if it will be some messianic event, waiting just out of reach, that will save us from the frightening things in our world. But the future also does not exist. It is only anticipation in the present moment. When we think of the revolution as a specific event, like an armed uprising that will take place in the future, we can become concerned about whether our actions take us closer to our idea of that event or farther away. We may become fixated on the purity of our vision, focusing only on the ideal, classless future, and neglecting other forms of oppression that others struggle against in the here and now. Or we may become anxious, thinking that it is an impossible task, or that we would have nothing to contribute, imagining instead that the future revolution will be led by anti-fascist catgirls or revolutionary daddies who will do the fighting for us. This can turn us against each other, or make us doubt ourselves, wondering whether what we or those around us are doing is truly revolutionary or merely reform. It is okay to have these doubts. Simply recognize them and return to the present moment. Desire to abolish the class system. By noticing and letting go of doubts, and not judging ourselves or others for having them, we become prepared to take and wield power in the present, to neither retreat into ruminating on how we have been hurt in the past by the current political system, nor project our desire for change onto imaginary future heroes, but instead, in the present moment, to realize the energy inside of ourselves that we can use to lead the revolution in presentness and out. When we look at the revolution either as a distant project of the future or the redemption of the past, we often imagine it as a moral crusade, springing from the best impulses of our hearts, and someday bringing about a lasting justice. But this way of thinking can also bind us and stop us from seeing a way forward in the present. It is easy to become overwhelmed or disappointed when our own sense of justice is not met, and to become concerned with how the resources of our world are distributed, rather than the conditions under which they are extracted and produced. We stray from the present and class conflict, and it is easy to conflate our moral desire for a better world with the ideals of participation in bourgeois democracies in which we are raised. That is not to say that we must abandon our moral ideals or close our hearts to democratic participation or the suffering of others, or that our smaller efforts to make the world a better place are necessarily a misuse of our time. It is merely to appreciate that a revolution is more than a change in the distribution of goods, or a struggle to get a slightly fairer deal. It is the struggle to abolish the causes of that injustice, not merely its symptoms, which are fleeting and can flare up chaotically as long as class conflict persists. Breathing in, political revolution, and out. Aware of your chest, your belly, that tingling sensation in your head, shoulders, chest, and down through your legs. You may become aware that you are holding tension in your neck, or your jaw, or cognitive tension brought about by trying to reconcile the internal contradictions of capitalism. With your next breath, just invite any tense muscles to let go. In a moment, we will count backwards from 5 and gradually return to our normal awareness. But first, take a moment to suspend yourself in this relaxed state, as if deep in an ocean, the waves sway overhead, but you are still and calm. And now we will begin to surface with 5 short phrases. You may wish to repeat them in your mind or out loud, whatever is best for you. Beginning with 5. I am aware of my breath. And now, 4. I am aware of my body, becoming more aware with each breath. 3. I am aware of class conflict, and out with 2. I am aware of the revolutionary energy inside me. And now, finally, 1. I embrace revolution in the present moment. Fantastic job. If you wish, you can stay in this relaxed state for as long as you desire. Or you may wish to continue your day renewed with this energy. Just remember to allow your awareness to always return to breath and the present moment, and the desire to abolish the class system. This meditation was written and performed.
Blood in My Eye by George L. Jackson. After the revolution has failed, after the killing is done, the ruling class goes on about the business of making profits as usual. On withdrawal. Syllogism. Now, argument with 2 premises and a conclusion. A logical scheme of a formal argument consisting of a major and minor premise and a conclusion which must logically be true if the premises are true. Merriam-Webster. After revolution has failed, all questions must center on how a new revolutionary consciousness can be mobilized around the new set of class antagonisms that have been created by the authoritarian reign of terror. At which level of social, political, and economic life should we begin our new attack? First, we, the black partisans and their vanguard party, the old and new left alike, must concede that the workers' revolution and its vanguard parties have failed to deliver the promised changes in property relations or any of the institutions that support them. This must be conceded without bitterness, name-calling, or the intense rancor that is presently building. There have been 2 depressions, 2 great wars, a dozen serious recessions, a dozen brush wars, crisis after economic crisis. The mass psychosocial national cohesiveness has trembled on the brink of disruption and disintegration repeatedly over the last 50 years, threatening to fly apart from its own concentric inner dynamics. But at each crisis, it was allowed to reform itself. With each reform, revolution became more remote. This is because the old left has failed to understand the true nature of fascism. We will never have a complete definition of fascism because it is in constant motion, showing a new face to fit any particular set of problems that arise to threaten the predominance of the traditionalist capitalist ruling class. But if one were forced for the sake of clarity to define it in a word simple enough for all to understand, that word would be reform. We can make our definition more precise by adding the word economic. Economic reform comes very close to a working definition of fascist motive forces. Such a definition may serve to clarify things, even though it leaves a great deal unexplained. Each economic reform that perpetuates ruling class hegemony has to be disguised as a positive gain for the up-thrusting masses. Disguise enters as a third stage of the emergence and development of the fascist state. The modern industrial fascist state has found it essential to disguise the opulence of its ruling class leisure existence by providing the lower classes with a mass consumer's flea market of its own. To allow a sizable portion of the new state to participate in this flea market, the ruling class has established currency controls and minimum wage laws that mask the true nature of modern fascism. Reform, the closed economy, is only a new way for capitalism to protect and develop fascism. After the German SS agents or Italian black shirts kick in the doors and herd Jews and communist partisans to death camps, after Peg Leg White's Black Legion terror and the Guardian of the Republic and their offspring legitimize the FBI, in other words, after the fascists have succeeded in crushing the vanguard elements and the threat they pose is removed, the ruling class goes on about the business of making profits as usual. The significance of the new fascist arrangement lies in the fact that this business as usual is accompanied by concessions to the degenerate segment of the working class, with the aim of creating a buffer zone between the ruling class and the still potentially revolutionary segments of the lower classes. Corporative ideals have reached their logical conclusion in the U.S. The new corporate state has fought its way through crisis after crisis, established its ruling elites in every important institution, formed its partnership with labor through its elites, erected the most massive network of protective agencies replete with spies, technical and animal, to be found in any police state in the world. The violence of the ruling class of this country in the long process of its trend towards authoritarianism and its last and highest state, fascism, cannot be rivaled in its excesses by any other nation on earth today or in history. With each advancement in the authoritarian process and strengthening of the ruling class's control over the system, there was a corresponding weakening of the people's and workers' movement. And intellectuals still argue whether America is a fascist country. This concern is typical of the American left's flight from reality, from any truly extreme position. This is actually a manifestation of the authoritarian process seeping into its own psyche. At this stage, how can anyone question the existence of a fascist arrangement? Just consider the awesome centralization of power and the proven fact that the largest part of the gross national product is in the hands of a minute portion of the population. Of course, the revolution has failed. Fascism has temporarily succeeded under the guise of reform. The only way we can destroy it is to refuse to compromise with the enemy state and its ruling class. Compromises were made in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. The old vanguard parties made gross strategic and tactical errors. At the existential moment, the last revelation about oneself, not many members of the old vanguard choose to risk their whole futures, their lives, in order to alter the conditions that Huey P. Newton describes as destructive of life. Reformism was allowed. The more degenerate elements of the working class were the first to succumb. The vanguard parties supported the capitalistic war adventure in World War II. Then they helped to promote the mass consumers market that followed the close of the war, the flea market that muted the workers' more genuine demands. Today we are faced with a clearly different set of class antagonisms, the complexities of a particularly refined fascist economic arrangement, where the controlling elites have co-opted large portions of the lowly working class. When we ask ourselves, where will we attack the enemy state, we are answered at the productive point. The next logical question is, with whom and what will we attack the fortified entrance of the productive and distributive system in a nation of short-sighted, contented, conservative workers? Obviously, The fascist movement is counter-revolution at its very center. Fascist reformism is a calculated response to the classic scientific socialist approach to revolution through positive mobilization of the working classes. From its inception, the fascist arrangement has attempted to create the illusion of a mass society in which the traditional capitalist ruling class would continue to play its leading role. A mass society that is not a mass society. A mass society of authoritarians whose short-term material interests are perfectly suited to the development of the perfect totalitarian state and centralized economy. The most precise definitions of fascism involve the concept of scientific capitalism, or controlled capitalism, a sophisticated, totalitarian, learned response to the challenge of egalitarian scientific socialism. After its successful establishment in Spain, Portugal, Greece, South Africa, and the United States of America, we are faced with the obvious question: how to raise a new consciousness. We are faced with the task of raising a positive mobilization of revolutionary consciousness in a mass that has gone through a contrapositive authoritarian process. The new vanguard elements seem to agree that withdrawal from the enemy state and its social, political, and economic life is the first step towards its destruction. The new vanguard elements seem to agree that the new revolutionary consciousness will develop in the struggles of withdrawal. However, after this point, agreement grows vague and is all but lost in a sea of contradiction. The contention turns on one primary question: the scope and range of violence within the revolutionary process. After the lengthy and clearly unnecessary ideological battle that laid to rest a direct approach to revolution by the white or black worker, we are now faced with an equally unnecessary ideological battle over which of the various communal revolutionary cultural approaches has the stronger revolutionary validity. The problem is compounded by the almost apolitical withdrawal of the growing Weatherman faction and their estranged allies on campus to organic food gardens and a life of sex, music, and drugs. Their Nietzschean Hegelian withdrawal mimics the European historical experience of the last 5 generations. In our equation, this must be considered the minor side of the syllogism. Though revolution is in fashion, the realistic, cohesive synergism seems as yet impossibly remote. On the other side of the equation, we have Huey Newton's concept of black communes set well within the huge population centers of the enemy state. This concept accepts any level of violence that will be necessary to enforce the demands of the people and workers. These communes will be tied to one another by a national and international vanguard party and joined with the world's other revolutionary societies. They are the obvious answer to all the theoretical and practical questions and problems about an American revolution. A revolution that will be carried out principally by blacks. The question I've asked myself over the years runs this way: who has done most of the dying, most of the work, most of the time in prison on Max Row? Who is the hindmost in every aspect of social, political, and economic life? Who has the least short-term interest, or no interest at all, in the survival of the present state? In this condition, how could we believe in the possibility of a new generation of enlightened fascists who would dismantle the basis of their hierarchy? Just how many Americans are willing to accept the physical destruction of some parts of their fatherland so that the rest of the land in the world might survive in good health? How can the black industrial worker be induced to carry out a valid workers' revolutionary policy? What and who will guide him? The commune, the central city-wide revolutionary culture. But who will build the commune that will guide the people into a significant challenge to property rights? Carving out a commune in the central city will involve claiming certain rights as our own, out front, rights that have not been respected to now, property rights. It will involve building a political, social, and economic infrastructure capable of filling the vacuum that has been left by the establishment ruling class and pushing the occupying forces of the enemy culture from our midst. The implementation of this new social, political, and economic program will feed and comfort all the people on at least a subsistence level and force the owners of the enemy bourgeois culture either to tie their whole fortunes to the communes and the people, or to leave the land, the tools, and the market behind. If he will not leave voluntarily, we will expel him. We will use the shotgun and the anti-tank rocket launcher. Who will build on an ideal that begins with force? The vanguard party is now nationwide, but vanguard parties cannot build revolutions alone, nor can a vanguard party expect a full party line agreement before it moves in the direction of the people. Revolution is illegal. It's against the law. It's prohibited. It will not be allowed. It is clear that the revolutionary is a lawless man. The outlaw and the lumpen will make the revolution. The people, the workers, will adopt it. This must be the new order of things after the fact of the modern industrial fascist state. In blacks, the authoritarian traits are mainly the effects of terrorism and lack of intellectual stimulation. The communal experience will redeem them. At present, the black worker is simply choosing the less dangerous and complicated strategy of survival. All classes and all people are subject to the authoritarian syndrome. It is an atavistic throwback to the herd instincts, but it requires only the proper trauma, the proper eco-sociological set of circumstantial pressures to bring forth a revolutionary consciousness. Racism enters on the psychosocial level in the form of a morbid, traditional fear of both blacks and revolutions. The resentment of blacks and conscious or unconscious tendencies to mete out pain to blacks throughout the history of America's slave systems all came into focus when blacks began the move from south to north and from countryside to city to compete with whites in industrial sectors and, in general, engage in status competition. Resentment, fear, insecurity, and the usual isolation that is patterned into every modern capitalist industrial society. The more complex the products, the greater the division of labor, the higher the pyramid, the broader its base, and the smaller the individual brick tends to feel, are multiplied by 10 when racism, race antagonism, is also a factor. There is certainly no lack of evidence to prove the existence of an old and built-in character assassination of programmed racism. What class controls the nation's educational facilities, prints the newspapers and magazines that carry the little cartoons, and omits or misrepresents us to death, has always served to distract and diffuse feelings of status deprivation suffered by the huge sectors just above the black one. Then also to account for the seemingly dual nature recognizable in the authoritarian personality, conformity, but also a strange latent destructiveness. Racism has always been employed as a pressure release for the psychopathic destructiveness evinced by a people historically processed to fear, to feel the need for a decision maker, to hate freedom. The revolutionary is outlawed. The black revolutionary is a doomed man. All of the forces of counter-revolution stack up over his head. He's standing in the tank trap he has dug. He lives in the crosshairs. No one can understand the feeling but himself. From the beginning of his revolutionary consciousness, he must use every device to stay alive. Violence is a forced issue. It's incumbent on him. The very first political programs have had to be defended with duels to the death. The children's breakfast programs haven't been spared. The next round of commune building could cause the third great war of the century. We must build with the fingers of one hand wrapped around a gun, an anti-personnel weapon. We cannot leave the central city. This must be understood by the other revolutionary people if we are to move together to conclusive action. The war will be fought in the nerve centers of the nation, the cities where Angela was finally captured as she was at work for the revolution, where Huey was found hiding and working by the government's propaganda apparatus. We cannot withdraw from the cities. In order to complete the revolutionary syllogism, the fascists must be forced to withdraw, and under cover of the guns which force their withdrawal, we will build the new black communes, a blade in the throat of fascism. Blood in My Eye by George L. Jackson. Fascism, its most advanced form, is here in America. Comrade John, I've just finished rereading Angela's analysis of fascism. She's a brilliant, big, beautiful revolutionary woman, ain't she? I've studied your letters on the subject carefully. It could be productive for the three of us to get together at once and subject the whole question to a detailed historical analysis. There is some difference of opinion and interpretation of history between us, but basically, I think we are brought together on the principal points by the fact that the three of us could not meet without probably causing World War III. Give her my deepest and warmest love, and ask her to review these comments. This is not all that I will have to say on the subject. I'll constantly return to myself and re-examine. I expect I will have to carry this on for another couple of 100 pages. We'll deal with the questions as they come up, but for now this should provoke both of you to push me on to a greater effort. The basis of Angela's analysis is tied into several old left notions that are at least open to some question now. It is my view that out of the economic crisis of the last Great Depression, fascism corporativism did indeed emerge, develop and consolidate itself into its most advanced form here in America. In the process, socialist consciousness suffered some very severe setbacks. Unlike Angela, I do not believe that this realization leads to a defeatist view of history. An understanding of the reality of our situation is essential to the success of future revolutionizing activity. To contend that corporativism has emerged and advanced is not to say that it has triumphed. We are not defeated. Pure fascism, absolute totalitarianism, is not possible. Hierarchy has had 6,000 years of trial. It will never succeed for long in any form. Fascism and its historical significance is the point of my whole philosophy on politics and its extension, war. My opinion is that we are at the historical climax, the flashpoint of the totalitarian period. The analysis in depth that the subject deserves has yet to be done. Important as they are, both Wilhelm Reich's and Franz Newman's works on the subject are limited. Reich tends to be over-analytical to the point of idealism. I don't think Newman truly sensed the importance of the anti-socialist movement. Behemoth is too narrowly based on the experience of German National Socialism. So there is so much to be done on the subject and time is running out. If I am correct, we will soon be forced into the same fight that the old left avoided. 6/20/1971. It is not defeatist to acknowledge that we have lost a battle. How else can we regroup and even think of carrying on the fight? At the center of revolution is realism. To call one or two or a dozen setbacks defeat is to overlook the ebbing and flowing process of revolution. coming closer to our calculations, and then receding, but never standing still. If a thing isn't building, it must be decaying. As one force emerges, the opposite force must yield. As one advances, the other must retreat. There is a very significant difference between retreat and defeat. I am not saying that our parents were defeated when I contend that fascist corporativism emerged and advanced in the US. At the same time, it was making its advance. It caused, by its very nature, an advance in worldwide socialist consciousness. When US capitalism reached the stage of imperialism, the Western great powers had already divided among themselves almost all the important markets in the world. At the end of World War II, when the other imperialist powers had been weakened, the US became the most powerful and richest imperialist power. Meanwhile, the world situation was no longer the same. The balance of forces between imperialism and the socialist camps had fundamentally changed. Imperialism no longer ruled over the world, nor did it play a decisive role in the development of the world situation. Vo Win Jia. In my analysis, I am simply taking into account the fact that the forces of reaction and counter-revolution were allowed to localize themselves and radiate their energy here in the US. The process has created the economic, political, and cultural vortex of capitalism's last reform. My views correspond with those of all the Third World revolutionaries, and if taken in the international sense, they are aggressive and realistic. The second notion that stands in the way of our understanding of fascist corporativism is a semantic problem. When I am being interviewed by a member of the old guard and point to the concrete and steel, the tiny electronic listening device concealed in the vent, the phalanx of goons peeping in at us, his barely functional plastic tape recorder that cost him a week's labor, and point out that these are all manifestations of fascism, he will invariably attempt to refute me by defining fascism simply as an economic geopolitical affair where only one political party is allowed to exist above ground and no opposition political activity is allowed. But examine that definition of totalitarianism, comrade. No opposition parties are allowed in China, Cuba, North Korea, or North Vietnam. Such a narrow definition condemns the model revolutionary societies to totalitarianism. Despite the presence of political parties, there is only one legal politics in the US, the politics of corporativism. The hierarchy commands all state power. There are thousands of ways, however, to attack it and place that power in the hands of the people. 6/20/1971. All levels of struggle must be conceived as inclined planes, leading inexorably to a point where armed conflict will engulf two or more sections of the people. Armed struggle or organized violence is the natural outcome of a sequence of historical events that have matured to the point of impasse. This is not to say that war is for us the only immediate recourse or the spontaneous result of a breakdown in lesser forms of political activity. I have always tried to emphasize that through every stage of political mobilization, there must be a corresponding and equal military mobilization of the people's forces. One is inextricably tied into the other, and not simply for the reason unwittingly put forward by the old guard that fascism allows for no valid opposition political activity, though there is some truth in that position. My position is based on historical precedents that indicate the probable scope and range of violence in an American Revolution. In the present class structure, we represent the group with the greatest revolutionary potential. we are black, the significance of which needs very little analysis here, though I will go into the mechanics of race at length later in dealing with the contextual structure of fascist hierarchy. But mainly, my position is rooted in the long history of the American business oligarchy's penchant for violent repression of any forces that have threatened its centralist movement, and in the very natural defense reflexes of any form of state power. Although as victims of one of history's most brutal contradictions, as the poorest of the poor, as blacks, it is quite justifiable and completely possible for us to destroy this country as a modern nation state, to attack it with a totally destructive counter-sweep of frustrated retaliatory rage. That is not our purpose. As revolutionaries, it is our objective to move ourselves and the people into actions that will culminate in the seizure of state power. Our real purpose is to redeem not merely ourselves, but the whole nation and the whole community of nations from colonial community economic repression. The U.S. has established itself as the mortal enemy of all people's government, all scientific socialist mobilization of consciousness everywhere on the globe, all anti-imperialist activity on Earth. The history of this country in the last 50 years and more, the very nature of all its fundamental elements and its economic, social, political, and military mobilization distinguish it as the prototype of the international fascist counter-revolution. The U.S. is the Korean problem, the Vietnamese problem, the problem in the Congo, Angola, Mozambique, the Middle East. It's the Greece in the British and Latin American guns that operate against the masses of common people. 6/21/1971. The nature of fascism, its characteristics and properties, have been in dispute ever since it was first identified as a distinct phenomenon growing out of Italy's state-supported and developed industries in 1922. Whole libraries have been written around the subject. There have been 100 party lines on just exactly what fascism is. But both Marxists and non-Marxists agree on at least two of its general factors: its capitalist orientation and its anti-labor, anti-class nature. These two factors, almost by themselves, identify the U.S. as a fascist corporative state. An exact definition of fascism concerns me because it will help us identify our enemy and isolate the targets of revolution. Further, it should help us to understand the workings of the enemy's methodology. Settling this question of whether or not a mature fascism has developed will finally clear away some of the fog in our liberation efforts. This will help us to broaden the effort. We will not succeed until we fully accept the fact that the enemy is aware, determined, disguised, totalitarian, and mercilessly counter-revolutionary. To fight effectively, we must be aware of the fact that the enemy has consolidated, through reformist machination, the greatest community of self-interest that has ever existed. Our insistence on military action, defensive and retaliatory, has nothing to do with romanticism or precipitous idealistic fervor. We want to be effective. We want to live. Our history teaches us that the successful liberation struggles require an armed people, a whole people, actively participating in the struggle for their liberty. The final definition of fascism is still open, simply because it is still a developing movement. We have already discussed the defects of trying to analyze a movement outside of its process and its sequential relationships. You gain only a discolored glimpse of a dead past. No one will fully comprehend the historical implications and strategy of fascist corporativism except the true fascist manipulator or the researcher who is able to slash through the smokescreens and disguises the fascist set up. Fascism was the product of class struggle. It is an obvious extension of capitalism, a higher form of the old struggle. Capitalism versus socialism. I think our failure to clearly isolate and define it may have something to do with our insistence on a full definition. In other words, looking for exactly identical symptoms from nation to nation. We have been consistently misled by fascism's nationalistic trappings. We have failed to understand its basically international character. In fact, it has followed international socialism all around the globe. One of the most definite characteristics of fascism is its international quality. 6/22/1971. The trends toward monopoly capital began effectively just after the close of the Civil War in America. Prior to its emergence, bourgeois democratic rule could be said to have been the predominant political force inside American society. As monopoly capital matured, the role of the old bourgeois democracy faded in process. As monopoly capital forced out the small dispersed factory setup, the new corporativism assumed political supremacy. Monopoly capital can in no way be interpreted as an extension of old bourgeois democracy. The forces of monopoly capital swept across the Western world in the first half of this century, but they did not exist alone. Their opposite force was also at work, i.e., international socialism. Lenin's and Fanon's national wars of liberation, guided not by the national bourgeois, but by the people, the ordinary working class people. At its core, fascism is an economic rearrangement. It is international capitalism's response to the challenge of international scientific socialism. It developed from nation to nation out of differing levels of traditionalist capitalism's dilapidation. The common feature of all instances of fascism is the opposition of a weak socialist revolution. When the fascist arrangement begins to emerge in any of the independent nation states, it does so by default. It is simply an arrangement of an established capitalist economy, an attempt to renew, perpetuate, and legitimize that economy's rulers by circumflexing and weighing down, diffusing a revolutionary consciousness pushing from below. Fascism must be seen as an episodically logical stage in the socio-economic development of capitalism in a state of crisis. It is the result of a revolutionary thrust that was weak and miscarried, a consciousness that was compromised. When revolution fails, it's the fault of the vanguard parties. It is clear that class struggle is an ingredient of fascism. It follows that where fascism emerges and develops, the anti-capitalist forces were weaker than the traditionalist forces. This weakness will become even more pronounced as fascism develops. The ultimate aim of fascism is the complete destruction of all revolutionary consciousness. 6/23/1971. Our purpose here is to understand the essence of this living, moving thing so that we will understand how to move against it. This observer is convinced that fascism not only exists in the USA, but has risen out of the ruins of a once eroded and dying capitalism, phoenix-like, to its most advanced and logical arrangement. One has to understand that the fascist arrangement tolerates the existence of no valid revolutionary activity. It has programmed into its very nature a massive, complex, and automatic defense mechanism for all our old methods for raising the consciousness of a potentially revolutionary class of people. The essence of a USA totalitarian socio-political capitalism is concealed behind the illusion of a mass participatory society. We must rip away its mask. Then the debate can end, and we can enter a new phase of struggle based on the development of an armed revolutionary culture that will triumph. On May 14th, 1787, the Constitutional Convention, with George Washington presiding officer, the work of framing the new nation's constitution proceeded with 55 persons, and only 2 were not employers. There have been many booms and busts in the history of capitalism in this nation and across the Western Hemisphere since its formation. The accepted method of pulling the stricken economy out of its stupor has always been to expand. It was pretty clear from the outset that the surplus value factor eventually leads to a point in the business cycle when the existing implementation of the productive factors makes it impossible for the larger factor of production, labor, to buy back the fruits of its labor. This leads to what has been erroneously termed overproduction. It is in fact underconsumption. The remedy has always been to expand, to search out new markets and new sources of cheaper raw materials to recharge the economy, the imperialist syndrome. Conflicts of interest develop, of course, between the various Western nations and eventually lead to competition for these markets. The result is always an ever-increasing international centralization of the various capitalists' elites, worldwide cartels, international telegraphic unions, now International Telecommunications Union, Universal Postal Union, transportation, agriculture, and scientific syndicates. Before World War I, there were 45 or 50 such international syndicates, not counting the purely business cartels. The international quality of capitalism is not happenstance. It is clearly in the interests of the ruling class to expand and unite. I am one Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Fanonist who does not completely accept the idea that the old capitalist competitive wars for colonial markets were actually willed by the various rulers of each nation, even though such wars stimulated their local economies and made it possible to promote nationalism among the lower classes. War, taken to the point of diminishing returns, weakens rather than strengthens the participants, and if the rulers of these nations were anything at all, they were good businessmen. Expansion, then, which often led unavoidably to war, was the traditional recourse in the solving of problems created by a vacuous, uncontrollable system, which never considered any changes in its arrangement, its essential dynamics, until it came under a very real, directly threatening challenge from below to its very existence. Fascism, in its early stages, is a rearrangement of capitalist implementation in response to a sharpening, threatening, but weaker egalitarian socialist consciousness. In regional or national economic crisis, the traditional remedies also include measures which stop just short of massive expansion on the international level. Traditional controls short of expansion and war have always existed in the form of government intervention, tariffs, public expenditure, government export subsidy, and limited control of the capital market and import licenses, and monopolies have always used government to help direct investment.
We're asking a question with this session. The question is, what kind of party are we building? And this is based on an organizational resolution that is circulated through the ranks. It's essentially intended to be an instrument in your hands for sharpening our understanding of our mission, of what we are doing with this party that we founded a year ago, with the intention of gathering the first 10,000 Bolsheviks into our ranks. And we understand that that recruitment target, that drive, the first 1,000 and the first 10,000, is really just a stepping stone for creating a mass party. What we want to do with this document and with this discussion is understand more vividly, how is this party going to grow? How do we intend to proceed from where we are today to a mass point of reference, to bringing the RCA to the status of a household name? What type of organization is it? What is the nature of a cadre organization? What is the nature of Bolshevism? Really, it's opening the door to broader questions. Understandably, a lot of people want to have a very concrete, a very practical response to this. One of the comrades in Ventura, California, submitted to the portal a little report that we published in last month's issue of The Communist. It said, people often ask us, what does the party do? Comrades might be tempted to answer with a list of organizational points. We attend weekly meetings, study Marxism, go to protests. Instead, I tried to provide a vision of our strategy to overthrow capitalism. At our current stage, we're recruiting a layer that is already drawing advanced conclusions about the need for communism and revolution. We're building a network of Marxist cadres throughout the US. Skilled revolutionary propagandists and agitators who will form the nucleus of a mass communist party. I used recent examples, BLM and the Palestine Solidarity Movement, to explain why we need a clear leadership and a program to succeed. As we get organized, revolutionary ideas will be a bigger point of reference in future mass movements, and we need Bolsheviks in every key workplace, neighborhood, campus, and union, starting with you. The comrade said, everyone I explained this to was ready to give their contact information, and one even asked me point blank how he could become one of the first 10,000 Bolsheviks. Said he would sign up for dues when he got home. I think this is a model response. And what we wanted to do with this document and with this session, understand more deeply what is the entire strategy, because if we can see the strategy clearly, then everything else will flow from that. And I think the United States has a very impatient, sort of pragmatic temperament. I remember having a small group of comrades in one of our first iterations of a branch back in California, in the small town, rural Northern California that I grew up in, having a meeting about revolution. And it just so happens we were on the high school campus, the sidewalks right here. One of my cousins walks by, sees us, oh, what are you guys doing? And I'm trying to get him to go away, and I said, look, we're having a meeting. Oh, well, what's the meeting about? Well, it's about revolution. And his response kind of sums up what people think when you say that word. He said, oh, do you need guns? We said, not at this stage, thank you. But a lot of people, and I would say the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the left, people who want to have a revolution, having that goal doesn't necessarily give you a clear understanding of how to arrive at a force that's capable of making that possible. And I think that's the nature of Bolshevism, is getting to the heart of this thing. It's always been a difficult thing for people to understand. How do you build the right kind of instrument? It's a very modern question. This question was answered for the first time in this book, What is to be Done? And I think this is the book you can read over and over and get more and more from each time that you read it. Admittedly, it's not easy to read the first time around. It assumes that the reader is swimming in certain waters. It's written for an audience of Russian revolutionaries in 1902 who understand the recent history of their movement, the debates that are raging. It's a polemic. But once you understand, once you get to the heart of what's being argued, all of the content is there. Everything that you need in order to understand what it's going to take for us to build this kind of party, to build modern day 21st century Bolshevism, is contained in Lenin's argument. And what was happening at that time was that the revolutionary movement was boiling up. It was raging. The number of people that wanted to overthrow the Tsar were it was a human tidal wave, and they were rushing into the revolutionary movement. In fact, the Tsarist prisons were overflowing with revolutionaries, and Tsarist prison cells were a sense of a cadre school. It was a university. You get locked up for 5 years, and there's not much you can do except read and write and think. And a lot of cadres got their education, not in a very pleasant setting, but in a pretty effective one, after all. Lenin was one of these. He was arrested in 1895, 1 year after moving to St. Petersburg, and spent the next 5 years in Tsarist prisons and in exile camps. And I think you can imagine that he was basically cooking this up. What is to be done was a product of that long period of thinking about what the movement needed. But every time the Tsarist police would come and carry out raids and sweep away one layer of leadership, another wave would pour forward, and it would just keep growing. The problem is there was a very low political level in general. You had a network of discussion groups, but you didn't have any kind of professionalism. There was no central force to coordinate it. And so Lenin could understand that you needed to bring this thing together, you needed to concentrate it and give it professionalism. He was fighting against primitive methods, against amateurism, and he understood something that nobody else really did, at least at a degree that no one else really did, is that if you want to give it that hardened core and professionalize a force like that, that's not an organizational, administrative, technical task. That is a political task. It's an ideological task. And what that means is the step you need to take is the step of training cadres deeply and thoroughly in revolutionary theory. Now, we can put the important information, put the bottom line up front. That's what we need to do today. That is the one key to our strategy from which everything else flows, to raise our political level, to train cadres, to train hundreds and then thousands of cadres. That is the only way for us to get to 10,000, but not just to grow in numbers, but to grow in quality, to become the kind of force that can actually wield influence and be a factor in the situation. Understandably, a lot of impatient young leftists don't like this answer. And they didn't like it at the time. Lenin put it forward either. They called him, well, they didn't use the word theory, bro, but, and they didn't say theory is elitist as such. Actually, they probably did make that argument. But they said that he was overrating ideology, that he was obsessed with literary, intellectual work, that it would be better if revolutionaries focused on concrete issues, practical, material demands, make it realistic. They had a high regard for spontaneity. They said, this is what's happening spontaneously. The workers are moving. We should just be supporting them. Essentially, they were arguing to tail end the movement of the working class. And Lenin fought against this severely throughout what is to be done. The first chapter is all dedicated to this. You need to sharpen, and you need a high level before you can unite. He says, in order for us to unite, we need firm lines of demarcation. You need to recruit people around a theory and around a program. That is the thing that you're recruiting people to. And if you do that from the act of uniting people around a single worldview, and I think we're making progress in this room. I think we have a single worldview represented in these ranks and in the RCA today. We've come a long way. If you do this, certain things will flow organizationally from that. If you have people that think like Marxists and they have the same method when they're analyzing events, if they have a shared understanding of the mission they're trying to fulfill in history, then it creates a certain mentality and you get iron discipline that's a voluntary revolutionary discipline based on commitment. And that's the way that you fight amateurism. These methods that you had, basically a lack of coordination, a lack of agreement, people rowing in different directions. If you want a force that's powerful and yet flexible and agile, something that's steadfast, that's not going to break apart when it gets tested under strain of events, then you need people, you need to build it out of special material. That's people that understand history, how history unfolds, the laws of history, and their role in that process. And that's exactly what the Bolsheviks achieved. In a sense, what is to be done is like the mission statement. In Russian, что делать? It's like what to do. It's like, here's what you do. That's what he was laying out. 15 years later, they completed the mission. 15 years late, separated 1902 from 1917. And in 1913, a few years before that victory, this is how a Tsarist police reported the impact of the Bolshevik cadres. It said the faction of Leninists is always better organized than the others. This is an internal report, obviously. Stronger in its singleness of purpose. They're more resourceful in spreading its ideas. Its circles are scattered throughout all the cities. They're the most energetic. They seem capable of tireless struggle. They're constantly organizing. That's because they had a shared ideology. It's the political clarity that created that kind of effective organization. He also explained that the role of the party is not to tail end the working class movement, but to raise its sights, to raise its horizons, to show the way forward. We aren't here just to support from the back ranks. We're here to try to explain with clarity, here's the way forward, this is the way, and try to win leadership on that basis. So how do you achieve this result is the question. I think many revolutionists would probably like to have a well-disciplined, solid organization. But again, there wasn't clarity as to how to arrive to this thing. A few weeks ago, I went to a branch meeting in Brooklyn, and we had a really good discussion about this document. Comrade Laura was there and made a good analogy, said that capitalism is like a massive wall that needs to be battered down. And you think about the mentality of most people who are anti-capitalist, they want to batter down the wall, and they hate capitalism, and they see with an urgency, the world is burning, all these people are suffering, we need to batter this down. But they don't really think what it's going to take, so they go straight to the wall with their bare fists, and they just start hammering, and they eventually get burnt out. And the Bolsheviks are those in the crowd that are like, let's take a step back, folks, this isn't working. We need to have an instrument that's suitable for battering down a massive wall like this. And that means we need to step back from the wall and start building it. And here's a construction site over here. It's going to take a long time. It's not going to be easy, but this is the only thing. A massive battering ram that the entire working class can hold on to, and then we're going to be able to batter it. So let's go. And then you try to recruit people to this effort, and some people still don't get what you're doing, and they're like, okay, well, you're saying we should abandon the wall. We can't do that. This is urgent. People are suffering. People have immediate needs right now. You want to go have this abstract construction project over here. We don't understand what you're doing. This is basically the debate that Lenin was having with the revolutionary movement in what is to be done. And so the short version is, yeah, he also said, what is the practical step that we can take? A press. You need media. You need a way to package ideas and organize people around that, so you can get on the same page that way. If you have a place where you're producing a stream of analysis, producing theory, producing reports, and it's not just written media. In our time, we have podcasts as well. We have YouTube. We have Against the Stream. We have, how many watch Against the Stream every week? Look at those hands, Fred. Let the International Center know that. Well, maybe it has something to do with the political unanimity we have in the party. It's nourished by weekly input. This is what Lenin was talking about. You need a way of getting people on the same page. That's what he was trying to build with Iskra. People said, oh, you're dogmatic, and you're too literary. And people say the same thing. Oh, the Trots, they have papers. They write articles. Well, they didn't understand it then. They don't understand it today. And we can leave those critics to their methods. Our methods are working pretty well so far, I'd say. We can look at the question of what is a cadre organization in general. And we've often done this in the form of analogies. There are multiple analogies. It's not just the military analogy. The comrades at the center know that I've been doing a bit of a rabbit hole into military structures, and I'll get into that, but it's not the only one. Anytime you have to have large numbers of people mobilized suddenly to achieve something, you need cadres. Anytime you need large numbers of people to come and respond to an emergency and get something done, and they need to be directed by a force that's already thought through, how do you direct, what needs to, what is it that we actually need to achieve, and how do we go about it? You need cadres to be the leadership of that massive operation. Think of any kind of emergency. You have a natural disaster, an earthquake, a flood, things need to be done. You need people mobilized. You have an epidemic breaks out, a pandemic. The CDC has its cadres. They actually have a pretty thorough explanation for their personal how to roll out a cadre. And a cadre, by the way, it means framework. It's French. A cadre is an individual part of this structure, or it could refer to the structure as a whole. So don't get confused. Sometimes you can talk about a medical cadre, and that's talking about the members of this unit. But what is a cadre? It's a special organization, and it's small, and it's tight-knit, and it has the ability to become massive. That's a pretty cool feature. And the ability to become massive very rapidly comes from certain qualities that the small group has. It's the level of expertise, the level of training, the level of professionalism and discipline. It takes a long time to basically make in concentrate the ingredients that you need on a massive scale. The concentrated version needs the ability also not just to be professional, disciplined, well-trained and educated, the ability to impart information out into a larger structure. Why framework? Because it's the outline of a much larger organization that can then be filled out. So you could think of it like a skeleton. You know, you need a structure that's sturdy, that's not going to break, that can uphold other tissues and organs. You know, a framework can be built out. You can think of it also as a foundation. There's a lot of different analogies. You need something solid, and then you can have a mass that rests upon this. So in the case of, like, say, a wildfire, in 2020, among all the other apocalyptic events, the western half of the U.S. was on fire, if you remember. And they mobilized 85,000 personnel, not just fire departments from all over, but all kinds of agencies. The National Guard was out there. You had all kinds of law enforcement, medical responder units. And think about 85,000 people is a pretty good sized army. They need to be fed, and they need somewhere to sleep sooner or later. And they need a lot of supplies, and they need fuel and trucks, and you need to have like decision making to purchase things, and you need and the supply line has to be established very quickly. So when something like this happens, you have what's called an incident command system, and you have a general staff that's established. And the leadership of every unit, you have a department for organization, for planning, for logistics, for finance, is going to be someone that has been thoroughly prepared for this emergency, that has thought through all the contingencies, and that knows this is the resources we have, here's the plan, if this happens, we're going to do this. And they start rolling out a response, and they're going to recruit members of different agencies, and each one, it's a very thorough division of labor. They figured out decades ago that if you don't have this figured out, you can't really do it in the midst of an emergency. It leads to chaos. You don't know who's responsible for making decisions, who's in charge, and who's going to report back, and how is it going to get done. It all needs to be figured out. So you have cadres in place, and they're going to lead the response. Any incident like this typically is a question of mobilizing, you deal with the issue, and then you demobilize back to the cadre. You don't need a standing army to respond to the next wildfire. In a sense, we're trying to mobilize and not demobilize. We're trying to build our forces and not lose forces. But in the history of the revolutionary movement, sometimes you have, naturally, a massive filling out of the ranks of a revolutionary party, and then after a revolutionary defeat, look, 1905, the Bolsheviks, there was more than one Russian Revolution, right? It was 3. The first one was in 1905. The Bolsheviks were not much larger than our forces today. In the course of that revolution, together with the Mensheviks, they all came together. Huge events, right? Now the workers are looking for a revolutionary. They're pouring into the ranks of the Bolsheviks. They grow to 150,000. I mean, that's a massive expansion. After the revolution's defeated, now demoralization sets in. Anyone who joined but wasn't part of the general staff, wasn't professionalized, hadn't studied Marxism, didn't really have a long view of history, is now also demoralized, and the thing disperses. They basically reduce back down to a tiny core. That was a very difficult period, but you see there's a cadre, there's a basic organizational feature that's happening beneath the surface. Well, this is what happens when you're responding to a wildfire. This is how armies are raised as well. And I do think that the military analogy is worth examining in detail. It's not just a metaphor. It is a cadre organization, and it's probably the most thoroughly worked out. They've had centuries to figure out how do you structure things in order to convince large numbers of people who have no military experience to rapidly get trained, become part of a unit, follow orders, and risk their lives. That's kind of a logistical issue, and it's not easy to do. And what you have are officers, and you have enlisted personnel who can make this happen. That's the cadres of a military. And the whole military, if you look at it as a big, vast, you could look at an army and just say, what's an army? That's a huge number of soldiers, and they're all wearing a uniform, and they have an arm, and they're ready to go into combat. Well, on the surface, that's what it is. In reality, it has a structure, and the structure is that's going to be permeated by sergeants. Sergeants are an enlisted soldier who's been promoted to the rank of a non-commissioned officer. And every unit is going to have sergeants, and they're going to have other ranks as well. And this is the way that troops are trained, assigned to a unit, mobilized, and then sent into battle. Look at the Civil War, for instance, to see how we also have this expansion of the troops, right? The beginning of the Civil War, you have the North. They have 15,000 enlisted soldiers, and that was in the standing army, and around 1,000 commissioned officers. They grew, in the course of the war, if you count up all of those who enlisted into the Northern Army, from 15,000, right? They grew to 140-fold growth to 2.1 million on the basis of those initially 1,000 officers, and then other people had to be trained rapidly to become officers. The whole thing, time is of the essence, right? When you're faced with a war. The Confederates did something similar. They had just 750 officers, and initially mustered 15,000 troops and continued to build from there. Over the course of the war, that side grew 80-fold. 1.1 million ended up joining on the southern. In total, you had 3 million soldiers enlist on both sides. And that's, again, it comes down to the core of officers who's prepared to take recruits and organize them and then let them tell them what to do. I mean, imagine being in that position. You have to know the drill, right? And so, just to run through this a little bit, at the risk of bringing you all into the rabbit hole with me, we will come out on the other end, and I think it will be helpful. But stay with me here. The smallest unit of the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps it's called a team or a fire team. There's 3 to 4 soldiers, and it's going to have a leader. Even at that small scale, I think this is like the size of one of our smallest cells, right? At that small scale, the leader of a team will typically be a sergeant. In the Marine Corps, it'd be like a lance corporal. We're talking about someone with 2 to 4 years of experience. Oftentimes, in the last couple of years, we were forming a cell of 3 or 4 comrades, putting in charge of that somebody who was recruited 2 or 3 months ago. And, the military doesn't do that. We weren't sending them into combat. We were sending them into campuses and workplaces. But you put a few of these teams together, everything works in 3s or 4s. You take one unit, put them together, then you got the next unit. That's a squad. 8 to 12 people is a squad. That's going to have in its leadership a staff sergeant. So this is someone that's got like 6 years of experience. Think a large branch, 10 or 12 comrades. Do you have someone that joined in 2019 leading that? Probably not in most cases. Again, put a few squads together. Now you have a platoon, 30 to 50 people. This is going to have a commissioned officer who's been to some kind of a military academy, at minimum, a lieutenant who's been to West Point or reserve officer training or some kind of thing like this, 4 to 6 years of education to lead that group. And that's like a district. That's our Brooklyn district. There's a certain level, and each of these units has one cadre in charge of overseeing the unit who's answering to someone above them and who has basically 3 or 4 people below them giving mentorship to, giving guidance to, but also giving orders. Now, obviously there's a difference, comrades. I'm not saying, we're not building a paramilitary organization. It's different. We're not building a chain of command either. It's seniority and years of service. It's not the same for political leadership because we're not training a network to hand down orders and people to be obedient to that. But that's not the way it works. We're trying to build a network that hands down like political clarity and inspiration. And you are trying to build like mentor relationships of training cadres that can help someone understand Marxism better, build their confidence, their clarity, and their ability to explain these ideas to others. Because after all, we're not going, the combat that we're going into, the class war, a cadre of a class war, think about it, the military is sending people to spread destruction and misery and to spread artillery. We're trying to spread ideas and to spread the influence of a revolutionary program. And so for that, you need cadres every bit as much as a military does, but it's a different type of cadres and it's a different type of structure. So I thought many of these things were quite interesting. They want it to be a very rock solid structure. Sometimes it becomes not so solid, by the way. Sometimes the thread connecting soldiers to officers becomes quite tenuous, and we can talk about that. But you have a cadre density throughout the army. That's the thing that needs to be understood, is that 15 to 20% of the troops at a large scale are going to be officers or non-commissioned officers. If the RCA was a military unit, it would be a battalion, and it would probably have 150 to 200 officers and sergeants who have an average of like 6 years of experience, more at higher levels, less at lower levels. And so this is basically, if you look at the structure we're trying to build, something that's solid, something that holds together, but we're not just trying to sustain a group of 10,000. See, when we get to 10,000, that's not when we all give high fives and then our work is done. We're trying to build something that our work really will begin when we have these kinds of numbers. The session we just talked about is deploying cadres into high-stakes situations to be able to make decisions and to counter this vicious enemy that we've been talking about, the capitalist class, the most vicious that history has ever seen. And so we need serious leadership for that. I think it's also, there's a number of things. How much do I want to keep talking about the military before? But one other thing here is that I found this document There's a lot of things on the internet, and one of them is raising an army, 10 rules. And it's not a joke. This guy is a mercenary private contractor who works like for the U.S. imperialists. When they go in and destroy a country, then you know that the imperialists have to rebuild an army. They often do a bad job of it. But this guy was critical of the Pentagon's system, and he's got 10 rules. He says the first one was to drop the Pentagon's train and equip mentality. Let me just read you this. Raising armies is more sophisticated than this. It involves growing leaders, building institutions, instilling professionalism. Training and equipping alone only gives you better dressed soldiers who can shoot straighter. It goes on. Number 2 is, secondly, you have to understand this is a deeply political activity. Technical approaches that ignore the politics will fail. Here's another. I'm not going to go all 10, but another one. You have to instill a professional military ethos. That's another way for saying you need political education. You need ideological training. Starting in basic training, imbue respect for the rule of law and allegiance to the Constitution. This was, again, someone who built an army in Liberia in 2014 or early 2000s. It says Liberian recruits spent as much time in the classroom as they did on the rifle range. So when you're building, he says, if you don't do this, you're going to have an army of privates. You know, basically soldiers with no experience and no qualifications to lead and to command and to hold things together. And of course, an army like that just falls apart. He says selecting for leadership is difficult. It takes 20 years to make a colonel in the U.S. Army. A colonel, I think, would oversee like a brigade of 5,000 or something like that. And yet, the countries can't wait that long. You know, they call this line of business, they don't just call it army building, they say security sector reform. And even that is a little strong, so they call it SSR. And so the last rule is, lastly, be humble. SSR is a marathon, not a sprint. Whether one is raising an army of 2,000 or 200,000, the methods are essentially the same, differing only in scale and scope. So I think we can take some of these methods, some of them don't really apply. The firefighters are also organized in a paramilitary organization. I thought this was interesting. I mean, there's patterns to this, right? New York City has 5 borough commands. Each has a borough commander. There's 9 divisions throughout. Each division has 4 to 7 battalions led by a battalion chief. Each battalion consists of 3 to 8 firehouses. That's around 200 firefighters. Each firehouse consists of 1 to 3 fire companies, each led by a captain who commands 3 lieutenants and 12 to 20 firefighters. In short, you can see when you need to mobilize large numbers of people to do something risky, it's good to think through the leadership structure. And this obviously applies not just to, think about what was achieved in 1917. I mean, this is basically, I think you can understand it better now after going through all this detail about the military thing. You had a general staff at the beginning of that revolution. In February 1917, you had 8,000 members of the Bolshevik Party. These were experienced people. These were people that had been through a lot. The Revolutionary Party had grown, had collapsed, had grown again in 1912, 1913. World War I starts, it collapses again. It's demoralizing. You need people, if you're going to be in it for the long haul and go through all of that, you need people who have a long view of history and understand what they're really doing at a deep level, and are not just going to be swayed by how things are going in the recent period. So that's the cadres. Over time, you forge something that is based on depth and clarity. Well, that's what you had essentially at the beginning of 1917. Now, they put forward an idea, right? The idea is, yes, you've overthrown the Tsar. The February Revolution overthrew the Tsar, but set up a capitalist government, a provisional government in its place. Lenin's message is, we're not going to be part of this government. It says it's a revolutionary government. It's not. It needs to be overthrown as well. We need to bring the working class to the realization that this is not their government, and that in order to achieve the basic material, the immediate urgent demands that the working class made this revolution for, like we need something to eat, we need to stop sending our youth to the front into a meat grinder. In order to achieve that, you have to overthrow the capitalists. This is the message. This is the program, right? All power to the Soviets. So this 8,000 is now the cadre there to transmit the message. Like the incident command begins, right? Now here's what we need to do. Go out and spread it. And you have agitators who know how to connect with the crowd. and you have people, correspondents, who know how to produce leaflets, and you've built up an apparatus of media that, as Lenin said, you need to build a machine and build it up to a degree of perfection that you can be able to inform the working class of Petrograd overnight. That's exactly what they built, and they informed the working class many steps of the way, night after night. Posters all over the streets of Petrograd. They were communicating. The whole thing is like you've built a massive apparatus capable of communicating on a massive scale, communicating to millions. Now, how do you build an army of communicators? Well, you have to have a lot of discussion and political clarity, and those people need to have depth. And being a good agitator means being rooted in a very thorough, very deep, very well-rounded understanding of the issues, so that you can say, this is getting to the heart of it. You can cut through something, make it very simple. Plekhanov, one of the founders of Russian Marxism, explained the difference between propaganda and agitation. Propaganda is explaining many ideas to small numbers of people. We're talking what we're doing: books, theory, a view of history, right? A consistent ideology, a thorough philosophical foundation. That's propaganda. Agitation is few ideas to many people, but you can't just choose one or the other. There's a sequence to this. In order to create agitators who are effective, who are able to connect with the crowd, you have to train them in propaganda. Very thorough training in Marxism. And at that level, then you have a Fiona Lully who can get on GB News and just send zingers and expose the hypocrisy of the ruling class.
We've seen from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is an anti-Semitic chant calling for the eradication of Israel, the eradication of Israelis, and the eradication of Jewish people.
No, you're a liar. You're a liar.
And when a Tory politician says, aren't you going to defend Britain?
When threats are growing, it requires all of Britain to lean in, as we've done in the past, hesitantly though at first, to say we're going to stand up and we're going to be firm and we're going to defend Britain.
There is no all of Britain. There's you guys and there's everyone else, right? If Putin is a threat to the working class in Britain, I don't trust Keir Starmer, I don't trust David Lammy, I don't trust the defence companies, I don't trust the billionaires, I don't trust the establishment as people who are going to defend the working class in Britain.
A class perspective, very simple. Well, 9/10 of the revolution was winning over the working class to a revolutionary program. And what Lenin understood as early as, probably back in those Tsarist prison cells, is that you need to train cadres very thoroughly in Marxist theory, and unwavering Marxist theory. It's like we have to fight eclecticism. We don't take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, they were the ones who got to the root of it. And their view is consistent. When you read one, you're reading all four, and you realize that. And any real Marxist when you realize it, you realize it, and you can't unrealize it. There's one Marxism. There's not many Marxisms. And when you understand it, then you see its power. We're trying to build something around that realization, and that's what Lenin understood. That is the thing that you have to do. Very few people have understood it through history, but we are the thread of those who have understood it in this international. If you think about it, it's kind of like you have an uprising is also one of these emergencies that's going to have an incident command set up, and they're going to have a general staff to respond to it, and it's going to be a pretty serious thing. Now, it's going to be essentially cadre versus cadre, right? Like one structure of leadership and response versus another structure of leadership and response. And in a revolution, you have one of them win. One of them was more prepared than the other, and one of them was more ready to enlist support in terms of numbers than the other one was. And the one that thought it had solid command, see, the military structure is about command and control. That's openly what they say. We're not about command and control. We're about political clarity. We're about truth. I mean, dialectical materialism is the thing that's guiding us. And so which one is ultimately stronger? I mean, revolutions, once you have mobilized the working class, the other one can melt away very quickly. I say this because we have left down to us a pretty awesome remnant of history from 1917. Trotsky reproduced a dialogue that took place among Tsarist officers when the February Revolution had basically had won, but they're realizing in the Central Command that they're realizing this fact through this conversation. And here's two generals, General Ivanov and General Khabalov. Okay, let me just read through the thing. How many troops are in order and how many are misbehaving? Kabalev's reply. I have at my disposal in the Admiralty building 4 companies of the Guard, 5 squadrons of cavalry and Cossacks, and 2 batteries. The rest of the troops have gone over to the revolutionists, or, by agreement with them, are remaining neutral. Soldiers are wandering through the town singly or in bands, disarming officers. Which railroad stations are guarded? Response. All the stations are in the hands of the revolutionists and are strictly guarded by them. In what parts of the city is order preserved? Response. The whole city is in the hands of the revolutionists. Wait, hold it, there's more. The telephone is not working. There's no communication between different parts of the city. What authorities are governing the different parts of the city? Response. I cannot answer this question. Are all the ministers functioning properly? Sir, the ministers have all been arrested by the revolutionists. What police forces are at your disposal at the present moment? None whatever. What technical and supply institutions of the War Department are now in your control? I have none. What quantity of provisions is at your disposal? There are no provisions at my disposal. How many weapons, artillery, and military stores have fallen into the hands of the mutineers? All the artillery establishments are in the hands of the revolutionists. What military forces and staffs are in your control? The chief of staff of the district is in my personal control. With the other district administrations, I have no connections. So in the key moment, I mean, all of the command and control counts for nothing if the whole mechanism breaks down, and history has shown many times the kinds of conditions that lead it to break down. That is, comrades, if our cadre are powerful enough, if they're strong enough, if they're prepared enough. And that is the whole point of the grounding in theory. How do we know how far along we are in creating a revolutionary military academy, a Red West Point, a revolutionary war college? Well, I think you have a good example that came out not long ago from Denmark. This was something that was circulated in RCI Bulletin 23. Now, we explained that the Danish section is doing quite well, right? It's a growing section, fast-growing section, very energetic in a small country. The working class of Denmark is just over 3 million people, which means that we have almost 1 comrade per 10,000 workers. And when they reach 1,000 comrades, there'll be 1 comrade per 3,000 workers. If what they had right now was like the U.S. population in terms of the working class, it would be like having 13,000 comrades right now in Denmark. So they're not doing bad, but that's why they're getting on the radar of the ruling class and their establishment media. And the largest paper in Denmark, the largest liberal paper, had this expose of journalists that went undercover. Well, he says I infiltrated. He says by infiltrating, I talked to a very eloquent, open-minded, friendly young communist. I expressed interest in Marxism and immediately got invited to a branch meeting. And he said, I didn't know what to expect. I thought it was going to be something absurd, probably, like people dressed up like Soviets or old-time nostalgics about the Soviet Union, or maybe hippies. I didn't know. Well, the title, I think the title of the article is something like, I infiltrated a communist meeting. I expected something absurd. What I found was the key to victory. Allow me to read to you extensively from this article. Because the way he says it, the way one of our class enemies says it is almost better than any comrade could have. The presentation, he's describing the meeting, right? There's a young comrade gives a lead off. The presentation, which was well prepared and well formulated, the level of depth of the discussion would take most people's breath away. Even relatively inexperienced attendees were able to recite and understand Marxist works and argue articulately from them. All of them had a broad knowledge of everything from socioeconomic conditions and economic history to war history and philosophy. The Revolutionary Communist Party must be said to be able to educate and train its members to a degree that enables them to clearly and convincingly present the Marxist message. Literally, even the newest members, the lowest common denominator, were at a higher level than the average Dane and the average liberal. Despite great diversity of age groups and educational backgrounds, all members, new and old, are apparently encouraged to immerse themselves intellectually and study Marxist theory thoroughly. In addition, they learn to formulate their knowledge as arguments, to write speeches, to debate, and so on, with the result that even a relatively new and young member of the party can be considered a top-tuned, well-oiled machine when it comes to defending the Marxist-Leninist vision, Another observation: although the 2-hour-long debate covered a wide range, all topics and questions were considered from a Marxist perspective. In formulating their arguments, the party's members took an uncompromising point of departure from the theory behind the party's ideology. He's like, wow, they're consistent. They all have the same view. And this is the conclusion. However much we may disagree with the Marxist worldview, we must recognize that part of Marxism's gains can be attributed to the fact that without apologizing for itself, it actually tries to deliver clear and unequivocal answers to humanity's problems, big and small. We must realize, here's the end, we must realize that the ideological battle is still raging, and that in order to win this battle, we cannot deny the need for a serious weapons upgrade. If you are in doubt about how to do it, I can recommend a visit to the Revolutionary Communist Party. Every cell secretary, every comrade who's leading a cell or any other unit of the party, write this down, RCI Bulletin 23. You can print this out, study it, mark it up, and ask yourself, is my cell at this level? Are we producing this kind of atmosphere? Is this our environment? Is this where our training ground is at? And if not, what's our plan? How are we going to get to this point where we're producing this? And it wasn't just accidental. It's not like the Danish comrades they swim in Bolshevism and then they're just ready to go. Hard work produces this result. This means that everyone, and it says it in the bulletin, they expected, look, we're going to have a contact is going to be there. All right, everyone studies and prepares and does the reading and comes with something thoughtful to deliver. And the result is, you ever have one of these cell meetings that's just electric and it just leaves you feeling with energy, and then you can go and build and you can get through another week and you can keep, that's the thing that we're trying to conjure, a factory of that. That doesn't happen automatically, and it happens only when the comrades go into it saying, that's what I want to do. I want to strengthen myself. I'm ready to bring something. Let's bring some fire this week to the cell meeting and do it each time. The results are going to be an atmosphere that produces cadres. Now, this was the way the Russian revolutionaries did it. It's not like, it was hard and it was boring, and it took years, and it was not glorious. And that was part of it. And a lot of people went through the ranks and, burnt out or disappeared or got active for a little while. The things that we're up against, we're not up against a czarist officialdom that's raiding our offices and, rounding up our comrades and sending us to prison. We don't have to worry about those things. But we're up against the pressures of life, like life under capitalism. And that means too many people, they come into the ranks, this is cool, I like this. They don't really get it, what we're doing, and eventually the pressures of life are like, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and I got other priorities in my life, maybe I'll come back, and a lot of them are coming back, and it's going well. But basically, what does that mean? It means that the general staff isn't quite at the level that it needs to be in order to impart the clarity to those ranks that are coming in about what we're doing. That's why we wrote this organizational resolution, to try and help with that. Basically, it's like, if you understand Bolshevism, if you can impart to people who are new, welcome in, this is your party. But you're not just here because you're a communist and we're a communist and we're all going to talk about communism, and you're not just here because you agree with our views and you want it to be with a group of like-minded people. What you're joining is a training grounds. That's the thing. We need to find the way to explain to contacts and new comrades, like, you are joining an ideological training grounds that will make a revolutionary out of you, and it's going to be hard and it requires your commitment, but there's a massive reward. Just get a taste of this Marxism. Once you see this clarity, that's the thing that can drive us. But you need to have that kind of environment that produces that result. How did it start in the early days? Plekhanov was the founder of Russian Marxism. Throughout history of Bolshevism, Lenin and Trotsky were always even though he became a Menshevik and he lost his bearings, but he played a role in starting this thing out in the 1880s when there was no Marxists in Russia. And he laid the seeds, and it was patient, very thorough philosophical work. They said, Lenin and Trotsky recognized that Plekhanov educated an entire generation of revolutionaries. But in these early days, what were these discussion groups like? Well, I have here a passage from a memoir of an industrial worker who participated in one of these propaganda circles in the 1880s. This is how they described it. The propagandist acquainted us with the struggle for a better future. He pointed out the path of our movement, the broad outlines of socialism, and told us we will attain this future only by the efforts of the working class as a whole. But to be an organizer of the working class, it is necessary to be a cultivated person, to whom others could turn with their questions, and from whom they could receive definitive answers. Therefore, it is necessary to discipline and cultivate oneself. It is necessary to learn by a definite program. A good propagandist must be able to answer such questions as why there is day and night, seasons of the year, and eclipses of the sun. He must be able to explain the origin of the universe and the origin of species. In the program must be included history, the history of culture, political economy, the history of the working class. This is depth. This is the way you train a foundation that can sustain a revolutionary movement. And you cannot skip this step. You know, we have comrades that are doing this kind of thing. We're reading Reason and Revolt and learning about materialism. I've visited comrades and I've seen, wow, our ranks are buzzing with enthusiasm for materialism and dialectics, and this is an awesome thing. This is where it begins. There's a sequence to these things, and you can't go straight to the exciting, now we're going to do the labor movement, we're going to take things by storm, and we're going to march it. The whole what is to be done was an argument against people that just wanted to jump to the fun part. Let's storm the fortress of the stars, and Lenin's like, okay, yeah, you and what army? The whole thing is, how are you going to build this thing? Lenin understood you need the depth first, the rest will come from that. You need the clarity of Marxism, and you need a very thorough training in this, and that takes time, and it's not fun. It's not fun to be told, this is a patient task, it's going to take years. That's what we're telling people. That's the bitter pill. But I think we're doing a pretty good job so far of convincing plenty of people that it is worth it, and that it's a rewarding process to engage in. Lenin argued that the press was central to this. Now, this is another thing that people didn't understand back then. They don't understand it now. But I think there's basically an argument here in what is to be done and in where to begin that has been overlooked by the vast majority of people that read this stuff. The press, Lenin was arguing, it's not just that Lenin loved newspapers. Like, yeah, this is cool. You got to be able to, sell these things. And that's not what he was getting at. He was saying that the press is a benchmark for something else. It's a proxy. It's a stand-in. See, if you can do this thing, then you can do this other thing. And it's a practical metric for your political strength in general to be able to produce media, to produce a press regularly, a podcast, to be able to produce a flow of information that analyzes what's happening. Now, if this flow of information is crisp and clear and precise, if it's effective, it'll spread. If it's blurry and general and vague, it'll spread. It won't spread as well, The whole thing, the question of influence, again, we want to jump to the exciting part. We want influence. We want 10,000 people. Well, if you just enlist 10,000 people, but you don't have anything to say to those people, they're going to look for, okay, what's our marching orders? 10,000. We're here to sign up for the Bolshevism. What do we do? You need a general staff ready to say, okay, well, you unit, come with me. Here's what we're going to do. Boom. And train them and start explaining things. And you need to be able to understand events thoroughly. It begins with understanding. See, the training we're trying to imbue comrades with isn't just training like our heads are in the clouds and now we're the intelligentsia and we're studying French philosophy and now we know this thing that the rest of the working class doesn't know and we're Marxists. That's not the point, comrades. You're trying to arrive at a level of clarity that is an instrument that can allow you to get back to the concrete at a higher level, to say the thing in the way that it needs to be said, that it lands, to be able to deliver clarity in a way that no other force in the political landscape is delivering. When we can do that, then we're ready for influence. And the press, the media, and I mean that broadly, the booklets we produce, the books, the things that we're producing, and against the stream and the Communists of America, everything we're using in order to try and get our ideas out there is kind of a benchmark for our political strengths and our ability to enlist support and to get influence. And that strength manifests by you all consuming the media and spreading it. If it's effective, if it's helpful, you get an idea that's like, okay, this explained it so well. Now I understand, and I've had that moment many times, like the article, and there's an article in here, wow, now I get de-dollarization in the bond market. That was like, whew, that one went over my head, and this article explained it, and then, comrades, remember, I went into the office and I couldn't stop talking to everyone about, you gotta read this article, Media department, let's circle up, we're gonna read this article together. Can the EC have a discussion about this article? This is the way the media is supposed to work. It's like, it's not just written to entertain, it's not just written to inform, it's meant to be the ammunition. that you pick up and then you use. And so if you have a strong media department, if you have a strong apparatus for producing this, then you're, here's the other thing, here's the other media department that we're up against, is Steve Bannon's. I've had this on my mind, and comrades know this is another sort of pet topic of mine. He's a vile reactionary. This is one of our enemies, one of our most determined enemies. But something about it, I find it effective, and when your enemy is effective, you need to pay attention to what's going on there. And what Steve Bannon is doing is, his view, he's a fundamentalist Catholic, and he's a vile xenophobe. Everything comes down to the immigrants, right? All the problems, everything he says is like, this is what the immigrants are doing, and he wants to give Trump a backbone to fight back, to railroad the courts. Like, that's his program. But what is he doing? He's taking in the news and he's churning out propaganda in a prolific way. Like, the podcast of Steve Bannon is called War Room, and they produce like 4 to 6 hours of podcast streaming content every single day, 6 days a week. And it's taking the headlines of the news, the headlines of everything that's happening. And Steve Bannon has shared, like, this is my media routine. I read the Financial Times every day, and I read the Guardian, the BBC. And Steve Bannon is consuming this, and he has a team of like 15 people working on his podcast, and they're all consuming the news and they're reading it. And in his war room, there's a fireplace, and above the fireplace they have MSNBC. That's like, we have to listen to the enemy and what they're saying, and they have the producers are like taking clips. And the beginning of his episode, if you watch any of this stuff, the beginning is like just a video montage of clips. This is what the mainstream media is saying. Just a couple seconds of this and a couple seconds of that, and he gives you a feel like this is the message out there, and then he comments on it. And it's the volume of what they're able to pump out. That's what allows him to be directing a current of public opinion. People can follow that, and then you guess what? There's people that will, maybe they're workers, maybe some of them are like on the shift listening. And while they're on their shift, they're like, this stuff is going into their head. We need to make the revolutionary communist version of this. We need to counter this and we need to outdo them. We need to out-organize them. We need to out-train them and out-discipline them and out-study them and out-cadre them. That is the force that we're up against. And I think if you see how they're doing it and how effective it is, then you understand this is why we're saying the paper is important. And then what's this joker, the liberal Hassan? Is that the... And he's like...
Of course a trot is selling a newspaper. Pamphlets and newspapers. Virtually everything that you search online that is a Marxist webpage with things written on it will almost always be operated by a trot. These are... In the socialist movement, these guys are like the archivists, okay?
Okay, yeah, they don't get it. They don't see why we're doing it. We understand why we're doing it. And we need to use this to train up our cadres, and really we don't have a second to spare. That was the point on the media. Just to bring this all home, comrades, I think it's important that, we wrote this as an instrument to put into your hands to help recruit. If you understand what the party's strategy is better, then you can get people on board more easily. And you can also help comrades who are new, who are building up a commitment and saying, okay, I'm trying to understand what this is. See, when I joined, it took a while, there's an interval involved. Like, you don't just join and then, boom, I'm ready to be a Bolshevik, like a lifelong committed soldier. It takes time before it took me a couple of years. Like, I joined, and my commitment was like, I'm very interested, I was very enthusiastic, but I was like, yeah, communist, I'm surrounded by communists, I'm a communist, yay. But it took me a while to realize what this party is going to do and what role we're going to play in history. And when I did, then everything changed. And you can't just artificially, give that in a package to people. It takes time for that to sink in. Like, we are going to overthrow capitalism. We are not just saying these things. We are going to do it, comrades. We've had a good start. I think that this party has become a factory of cadres like we've never seen before. And I see it every time I visit an area, every time I interact with comrades that I haven't seen for a while, like the development is happening at a pace that I have never seen before. And I think that's awesome. And really that is the only metric of our success. That's really the thing we're trying to do here. There is a surface appearance and then there's the reality that's happening beneath the surface. And the reality is we are a cadre organization and we're developing cadres. And that's the only metric that matters. What matters is not the surface number. What matters is the core of cadres, the general staff that are coming out of this military revolutionary academy, who know what they're doing in life and who know what their role in history is, and who are able to impart that to others. That is the real metric of our success. Now, there's a lot of practical things that could be said. It's always important to bring this home, and I think Trotsky had the ability to go into the theory realm and then to come back down and to bring it home. And we had a quote at the end of this resolution when the first time he was addressing Americans as comrades in the left opposition. In this letter, I think it was from 1927. I think it's kind of a cool moment when he's like first corresponding with the American comrades. Well, listen to what he says. We must not for a minute lose sight of the fact that the might of American capitalism rests more and more upon a foundation of the world economy with its contradictions and crises, military and revolutionary. This means that a social crisis in the United States may arrive a good deal sooner than many think, and have a feverish development from the beginning. Hence the conclusion, it is necessary to prepare. And he says, for the majority of the socialists, he's talking about those people that are just kind of like socialists on the side. Like, yeah, I'll overthrow capitalism with you on the weekend. But they're not really like, he's understanding, if you want to build something, you can't do it in that way. You can't like half it. You can't just like phone it in. For the majority of the socialists, and I have in view the governing strata, their socialism is a side issue, a second-class occupation accommodated to their leisure hours. He goes on to say, these gentlemen consecrate 6 days of the week to their liberal or commercial professions. On the seventh day, they consent to occupy themselves with the saving of their souls. These are not intellectual opponents, but class enemies. He's talking about the Second International in reality. But then he brings it home. Here's what you do. Bringing it home means say, here's what you do. Like, what is the takeaway from this? Don't just leave it in the abstract. He calls on them to find the road to the youth, to dedicate their time to training up the cadres. He says, find a few contacts, young workers, like they could be teenagers. Get in touch with them and develop them into cadres. He says, remain in contact, continual contact with them. Help them in their self-education. Train them in the questions of scientific socialism and systematically introduce them to the revolutionary politics of the proletarian vanguard. What it means to be a cadre is not like you learn so much and you get so smart and then now you got it and you're a cadre. You don't get a rank, you don't get a badge, you don't get said that now you're a cadre. Yay, that's not the point. That's not the point. What your measure, being a cadre means you have something to offer to other comrades and you can lift them up. Your ability to build other cadres is the thing that matters. Your ability to inspire, not to impress. Your ability to educate and to bring things out in other comrades and to build their confidence in the ideas of Marxism, in the revolutionary program. It's a thing that you can, it's not about, you don't speak in order to shine and show the comrades. You speak in order to help deliver clarity. That is the thing that a cadre is able to do. So I think, comrades, if we use these methods, and I think we know what we need to do. I mean, I've seen it, it's popping through the discussions all weekend. It's quite clear what we need to do, and I think we're about to do it on a scale that we've never seen before. I mean, the recruitment and the education of revolutionary cadres. If we use these methods, the methods that they've seen in Denmark, we are going to become a force like we haven't seen before. We will become a household name. It'll be a matter of time before the RCA starts sweeping aside any other left group. There's no competition out there. We're living in a theoretical desert. There's no Marxists out there. There's nobody talking about the things that we're talking about. There's nobody training cadres the way we're training. We have no competition. We have a wide open field. We need to get to work. That's the thing that we need to do. And if we do this, comrades, we will become a household name. We'll become the worst nightmare of the ruling class. And we will become the only hope for the working class.